Well. Owen KC Stephens, it's ThursdAGE.
It is ThursdAGE.
We've made it to Thursday, and what's weird about that is that when did it become Thursday?
What even is time? I missed a meeting yesterday because I forgot it was Wednesday.
I am just absolutely like I'm happy because we've got some great stuff to talk about today. We've got Ren who's hanging out over on the YouTubes. Derek's over there as well. Hi, Derek. Forrest is hanging out on Facebook. People are streaming in to hang out and talk to us about good stuff. And today's topic is what?
Today's topic is the Fantasy Age Companion, which, as the name might suggest, is designed to be a companion book to the Fantasy Age Basic Rulebook.
Keeping it simple. I love it. The Fantasy Age Companion is, as I've become more and more acquainted with all of our products, and I love the art is my favorite part. I really enjoy it. They really outdid themselves on the cover and on the inside. Really great stuff, and we'll get into that as well. And we'll even show some pretty pictures. But this was the companion was written and designed. So we've got Jack Norris, Chris Pramis, Steve Kenson. That guy's everywhere, by the way. Sean Lighthouser.
Steve remains who I want to be when I grow up.
Yeah, me too. Absolutely. And then, John Lighthouser and Malcolm Shepard, really all phenomenal people. I don't know when you, because you're in the industry, Owen, do you spend time to really check out the credits of products that you pick up that, aren't green on?
All the time. Absolutely. First of all, I'm always curious to know who I know that's worked on a product, but also who I don't know, because there are new people coming in all the time. I am also a big fan of sort of looking for similarities of tone. Like if you read something written by Schwalbe, there's a good chance you'll go, oh, Rob wrote this. And then I also like really looking at some of the credits other than just the writers and the designers. I like looking at who the editors are, who's the cover art, who's the interior art. And I admit I generally don't bother to read, this has a Green Ronin staff credit. I rarely go all the way down to read the staff, but I do think it's important because, it may be that Barry Wilson did not write or edit a single word in the Fantasy Age Companion, but he's listed on the Green Ronin staff because he did things with the company that made the existence of these books possible.
Absolutely. And a fine human being to boot, Barry. I do love me some Barry. And hello, Brian. Brian says, evening all. And let's see. Ren says one of their favorite Fantasy Age books. And so I feel like we ought to just start sharing. And let me pull open that window because, here we are talking about all the fantastic art and all the great stuff and the credits and stuff. Why not just show it? Some of that fantastic art I talked about. Let me jump up to the cover. I love that sort of
scroll a little higher on the cover because I want to show my favorite part. All right, there are two things I love about this piece of cover art. One is one of the monsters they're fighting is on the wall, and there is no sign that anyone has seen it yet.
That's great. I honestly, in my mind, just saw it as a piece of the architecture, but that's you're right. That is so good.
Then the other thing is that if you look under the M and Companion on a balcony across the way, there's clearly a little spellcaster, and he is holding a little staff, and it is glowing green, and the eyes of all of the things they're fighting are glowing the same color green.
That is awesome.
You have to wonder, has he summoned these creatures? Is he charming them? Is this an illusion? But it's a little tiny thing just to let you know, oh, this little guy way in the background that they're not even paying attention to yet, he is clearly involved. He's the the main, or she, right? It's a big loose robe. They could be anyone or anything, but that figure is clearly involved in what's going on.
I absolutely love it. And the art here is just phenomenal. And I believe we can get to the cover art. Credit is Javier Charo. That's great. And we'll check out the other art pieces as we go through here. But yeah, and as Owen said, you got the Green Ronin staff, all of these fine humans, some of my most favorite human beings that I've, on this planet of all time.
And I can be much more unbiased in reviewing this book because my name isn't in it anywhere. So I first encountered this as a Fantasy Age player in GM. So I have a, frequently when you're the developer or you're the writer or, if you're involved, even if you edited a book, your interaction with it was sort of at a professional level first. And then the question of what can I do with this as a gamer second. And this is one of the books that I got to encounter for the first time as a gamer and go, okay, what is in here? What's interesting? How does this work for me?
Very interesting. And so now as the lead developer for Fantasy Age, when you come across work in your sort of area of expertise, do you have to take special steps to sort of absorb that information, given that you weren't sort of an architect of the book itself?
Absolutely. Which is sort of how every game designer starts, right? When I was writing things for, second edition AD&D for Dragon magazine in the 1990s, I had not been part of creating any of those games. And as a freelancer early on, I was working on various D20 games. And these are things that I might have play tested, but for the most part, again, senior designers and senior developers and senior writers were creating these games, and it was my job to work with them. So it's really only in the Starfinder and later D20 era that I started having the opportunity to, I helped create the Star Wars Saga Edition. I helped create Starfinder. I was there for the beginning of those things. So in many ways, becoming the Fantasy Age developer has been a callback to an earlier skill that I had to have, which is to really internalize these rules and how they work and the theme and the tone and the things we say. And one of the advantages for that is that it lets you come in with a fresh set of eyes, which I think is always useful. It's one of the reasons why I like having, our ThursdAGE to talk to us, because they can look at things with a fresh set of eyes and ask me questions that never would have occurred to me to ask. But the other side of it, too, is that I really have to know this stuff. It is one of the reasons why I ran my own playtest game when I was first starting on the core rulebook, which will be releasing eventually. That there are things that I just don't know how to interact with them or what the real impact is until I play the game. And there are absolutely designers and developers out there, great designers and developers who write for games that they don't play. And I'm incredibly impressed that they can do that. I can't. If I am working on a game, I kind of have to be playing it or running a game for it, because otherwise I'm just not using it enough to get a real feel for how those things work.
So I'm going to drop a couple links in here because as we go through this, I don't want to forget to say that first, of course, you can pick it up at a PDF at the Green Ronin online store. You can also pick up a print version of that, and that is we're dropping the links in chat, and we'll include it in any kind of show notes so that when they unearth this in the future in the time capsule, wondering exactly who were these humans, they can actually track it down and pick it up themselves. But the bigger deal here, I'm kind of bearing the lead, is that there is a sale going on, and it is called the Christmas in July sale over at DriveThruRPG, and the PDF has been, it is 25% off.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and that's good stuff. Check that out. You want to pick up the print version. If you miss the sale by chance, you're watching this in the future, you're one of those aliens that I was speaking of, you can still pick it up at the store. But for now, you probably, if you want the PDF, I would head over to DriveThruRPG to get that deal. Okay, so now we talked a little bit about, I'm still kind of, it's funny, I'm looking at this, and I will be honest, I'm still sort of reeling that I usually find that my perception of the obvious is fairly strong, but I totally missed it, and I love it because Derek was like, it snuck up on you too, and so I'm pondering the implications of that. I would be one of the dead adventurers in this, or at least rudely surprised.
Yeah, that's what armor's for, right?
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Okay, so here we are. We talked about the credits. Now we're rolling in, and Owen, I'm just going to follow your lead. You tell me where to go, and we'll go.
So I want to show people the table of contents briefly first. This is sort of broken up into two broad types of information. And I'll go into why that is a little bit here in a minute. But first, let's talk about what they are. First of all, there's just more stuff. So like when you were looking at the races and backgrounds, there's Beast Folk and the Drac and Orions, and those are just more backgrounds. They've got more background groups, background descriptions. When you're looking at the new talents and new specializations, again, that's just more things. It's the same with the Arcana. So those are things that you can just take exactly the way they are and bolt them on to a game using the basic rules. Now, that's the general. As it turns out, there are some cases like with the Bard where the Bard specialization specifically says, hey, the Bard does some things that the Minstrel from the core book does and does them better. So if you have a Bard, you probably don't need the Minstrel. So that is sort of one category. The other category is stuff that you may or may not want to use. And these are either advanced rules or alternate rules. So for example, if you are looking at the mass battle rules, you may not want mass battle rules in your game. It may never come up. You may not have another set of battles you want to do. Or even if you have mass battles, maybe you're handling them differently, right? Maybe you say, hey, this is a massive battle, but I'm just going to run this skirmish that you all are in this little corner of it, and however you guys do, that will represent how the whole battle goes.
Where am I finding mass battle?
That is chapter 5, The World at Large, and it starts with mass battles.
Gotcha. Yeah, I'm just not seeing am I just dense? The table of contents. I'm sort of like
page 66.
Oh, thank you.
Chapter 5, The World at Large, page 66, and it starts with mass battles. And that's the first half of that chapter, and the second half is realms and organizations.
Now, Owen, a quick question. How will people know, so these advanced sort of settings, is it fairly clear? Like, is it in the paragraph, or, if I'm a new GM, am I being guided along to maybe these are things that you want to add or not?
So, yeah. The introduction to this book, frequently people just totally gloss the introduction, but page 3, page 4, the introduction is kind of important in this case because it talks about the fact that this book includes stuff that you can use to add to existing campaigns and stuff you can use to build your own setting. And that, let's see, we've got a header, drowning in the kitchen sink, which is on page 5 of the PDF, page 4 if you're on the print version, which just says it can be tempting when opening an expansion book for a role-playing game to start throwing every new rule and option into the mix right away. And then it talks about some of them are not designed to be used together even. There are options designed to make combat more lethal. And then there are some options that are designed to make things more cinematic, and you don't really want to add both those options at the same time. So it has examples of all those things, but each chapter and each section also talks a little bit about why you might or might not want to add that particular set of rules. I really think of the Fantasy Age Companion as a GM's toolkit. Specifically for what do you want to be able to do that the basic rule book isn't supporting it enough. A great example of that, and I'm getting I'll get to a great example of that in a minute. So I just wanted people to know that there are these two different kinds of content, and you can use just the easy stuff if you want to. This can be seen as a book that is just, hey, here are extra arcana, specializations, talents, and backgrounds. And that's it. That's what we've got. And here are some new playable species. And you can ignore the rest of it, and that's fine. It's got new adversaries and other NPCs, so you can see it as a sort of a mini bestiary. That's great. There's nothing wrong with that. You can also see it as adding things that you only might need. So mass battles are example, or chapter 6 talks about vehicles and chases and structures.
I'm sorry.
Vehicle chases, structures, and explosions.
I tried to get to the mute button, but it came out too fast.
We've got rules for chases. If you want to have chases as their own sort of dynamic stunt-driven thing, you can add those in. If you never have a chase in your campaign, or if when you have a chase, you're perfectly happy just saying, hey, everybody make a dexterity test and whoever does best wins, then you can ignore those rules. So that's an example of stuff that the GM can look and say, what is my game missing that I might want to put into it?
So,
and that goes,
go ahead. I was just going to ask you, when it comes to that kind of stuff, I love it. And I love the help of kind of fleshing out and adding new aspects to your gameplay and to the stories that you tell. What is there's so many amazing additions and so many thoughtful sort of takes on, like chases and how vehicles work and, all of that stuff, and the thought that hey, maybe people who are preparing to do something around the table, they'll want to know, let's talk about the stages of a battle and that kind of stuff. Where does that come from? Does that come from, what is the mix of hearing somebody say, gosh, I wish it would do this and this, and what the architect of this book sort of thought, hey, we should add that in here. Where does that come from?
So there's sort of a tradition in hardback, big role-playing game systems, going back to the D&D books and other stuff from the same time, of having that book that expands the rules. And that's sort of the Unearthed Arcana for the old D&D fans, or the Advanced Player's Guide for people that really cut their teeth on Pathfinder, or the Player's Handbook 2 and the DMG 2 for people that got in on 4th edition. It's the book that we say, hey, instead of this being a bunch of monsters or just a bunch of advice or just an adventure, this is more rulebook, but none of it is basic. None of it is core. None of it is stuff that you have to have. So usually, the architect of a book like this is saying, okay, the basic rule book or the core rule book's been out for a while. People are playing with it. I'm playing with it. People are writing campaigns. I, as the creator or developer of the game, have thought of things that I wish I had added. Like when you look at the new spell arcana for chapter 3 magic, which is around page 32, 33. There's some arcana in there like lightning and shadow and air, or even just divination. Those are some super basic things that spellcasters do in a lot of games and fiction that we just didn't have room for, didn't consider to be a high enough priority for the core rulebook. So those are the things where they've just had some ideas and you think, well, here's a place where we can flesh things out. People like to have new options. We've seen how spells work. We have some experience and feedback with it. And Brian Irving says, it took me a while to get the hang of the chase rules, but now I love them. Yeah, that's a perfect example. So that's the other kind of thing where people say, hey, instead of just having more of the stuff that works exactly the same way, right? Like the Arcana, while we've got some stuff in there, like cantrips and stuff, the majority of the Arcana are just, hey, this is the Arcana. You know how this works. This is just new options. Then there are places where we can say, oh, the rules as we've written them don't necessarily handle some specific thing that could come up in a story, because most role-playing games are telling a story. It doesn't handle them well. So chases is a great example of that. In any game that assumes that people have a set movement rate, and even though we don't always assume you're putting miniatures on the ground, right? We give all of the characters, hey, here's your move rate in yards per round. A chase is either I am faster than them or I'm not faster than them, and there's no randomness about it. But when you watch movies, for example, if you watch like Indiana Jones, you'll see Indiana Jones running after people carrying Marion in a basket through the marketplace, and they're knocking things over and jumping over stuff and ducking down alleyways and hiding. And those are things that aren't represented well. And by well, I mean they are not smooth, interesting, and intuitive, to use the normal tactical rules of Fantasy Age for a chase. So that's a place where you say, I see that there is this important storytelling device that this game could handle better. It's not going to come up all the time, but it's a thing I think we can add. And that is where you get things like chase rules, same with the mass battle rules, same with organizations and relationships. There are a bunch of things in this book that are specifically like, if this is important to you, you can add this. The other nice thing about doing non-core things this way is that if this was all in the basic rulebook, people would pick up that rulebook, which would be, 150 pages longer, and they'd say, well, I guess I have to use all of this. This is the game. This is all stuff we have to have. So I've got to be ready for a chase, and I have to look at relationships, and we're going to have to do a mass battle. Because if something's in a core rulebook, there's a reasonable expectation that those are core to the experience of the game.
Right.
Mass battles aren't core to the experience of Fantasy Age. You can perfectly well have entire Fantasy Age campaigns that never have a chase scene, that never have a mass battle scene, that never have relationships with NPCs that are so important that they drive the flow of the narrative. But those are things that you might want to add, and there's a good chance you don't want to add all of them. If you are doing a courtly intrigue game, which is inspired by Dumas and the Three Musketeers, and maybe some of the Jerheg stuff by Stephen Bruce, and or Dune for that matter, right? If you're looking at high politics and that's what interests you, then things like those relationships could become really important. But at the same time, you probably at that point don't necessarily care about vehicles because everyone's doing everything in court. You don't have to worry about mass battle rules because everything's going to court. So you take stuff that makes the game you want. You can look through this and either say, A, hey, this thing has come up and I wasn't happy with how the game's handled it, so now I see that there's a better set of rules for it. Or B, ooh, now that this game seems to handle that well, I can look for opportunities to add that. Another book that Green Ronin did that I helped with was the D20 Black Company book, which are very specifically books based on the Black Company fantasy series by Glenn Cook, which involve a lot of mass combat. And it's not that there isn't smaller scale stuff going on, but it's that sometimes great big battles that the main characters are in are an important part of that narrative. So you could say, now that I see that we've got these mass battle rules, I can set up a campaign specifically for, it turns out that your good, friendly little village is being invaded by a bunch of humans who think that they get to own the world, who have sailed in and discovered your island, even though you were already there, and they have told you that you work for them now, and you disagree, and swords are being drawn. And that story of you being conscripted into having to defend your homeland and deciding what all that's worth, that is going to be heavily driven by relationships and mass battles because the GM is setting things up that way.
I gotcha. Derek says, in my opinion, these are some of the best books for a system. APG was one of the best books in all PF1. It's the game, but refined by time and experience. I like that.
Yeah.
I like that
absolutely.
a lot. So what's interesting too, and folks may not know this, and Owen, correct me if I'm wrong. I'm rarely wrong, but this is where minions like those little yellow guys were invented, right? Fantasy. No, is that wrong?
No, that is wrong. But and here's the funny thing: if you wanted to put minions in your game, right? If you wanted the little yellow guys from Despicable Me in your Fantasy Age game, you could use the relationship rules and the minion rules in the Fantasy Age Companion to add them. And it is not my job to tell you that you'd be wrong to do that, right? If that is what is fun for the GM and the players, then by all means do it. And that's why toolkits can be so useful. And refined by time and experience is a great explanation of why
I like that. Yeah.
Why these games that tend to be this Fantasy Age is not as detailed as the D20 game, for example, quite on purpose, right? We very much make it less crunchy than that as rule interactions, but it does define specific things. This is not a game where you've got two stats, one is fantasy and the other is age, and you roll against those and that's all that happens.
Right.
As games like that evolve and develop, the player base and the designers tend to discover emergent behavior, things that are growing out of the interaction between the rules and how it actually gets used at the tabletop. And that is a great time to look and say, hey, it's time for an expansion, a companion book. It's not mandatory. You don't have to have it. But for people that want to be able to do yet more with their game, here's the companion.
I love it. That's that is fantastic, and yet again an example of how it is so difficult to flap you. You dodge it every time, and I still remain wrong, and everybody wins. Okay, great. So now we've talked about the table of contents. Is there anything else you wanted to cover in there before we rolled on?
No, we can totally roll on. So the first whole section of this pretty much talks about adding races and backgrounds, and that starts on page 5 of the physical book. And it talks about adding Drac and half-blooded creatures and Orions and how they may or may not be appropriate for a given campaign. The beast folk are fascinating because instead of having 47 different species based on anthropomorphic animals, right? We don't have totally separate things for cat folks and rat folks and lemur folks and ostrich folk. We just said, hey, if you're anything like that, here's a set of rules that will cover it, with a bunch of options. And it is a more complex species rules than there's in the basic rule book.
I'm looking at this art real quick, and this is races and backgrounds.
Yep.
And so you've got this cat cat race fighting.
Yep.
Is that just a villain, or is that a particular?
No, that's just
a bad guy.
An example, right?
Yeah, and I love it because it's just like that cat. Archer is just like, I want you to die, right? Meow. And the long walks of that little shtick, and I'm not ashamed.
Yeah, it was a quite a bit of distance to go.
All right, awesome. So you're talking about Beast Folk and Bloodied. I lost my place in all of this because I'm so dang funny. Talk about when there's. I love all of the additions, and part of fantasy is that ability to step into a different skin and sort of be beast folk and to really it's just like entire social structures and groups of people are so excited about it, they live their life like that. When it comes to creating these things, where does the architect kind of draw their inspiration from?
Well, I think different architects draw from different places. There is clearly a let us say traditional fantasy tabletop role-playing game tradition that encompasses things that were inspired by and include Dungeons and Dragons and Warhammer Fantasy and maybe RuneQuest, that are sort of tropes that a lot of different things have built off of. How dare you bring me and speak into this? So when you're looking at something like Beast Folk, right, there are a lot of traditions of cat folks and rat folks and Skaven and all sorts of things from different role-playing games. And so you want to be inspired by those, but then have your own take on it. Another thing that can happen is that you can just do off-the-cuff things that come to you as a creator, right? You can just say, hey, I've been studying these rules and I've been looking at how they work and I've been thinking about what would be cool in a fantasy game. And I think it would be really neat if we had a innkeeper background. If that was just an option where you're part of a guild, you're middle class, you are descended from an innkeeper or a tavern or a shop, you grew up amongst employees, etc. And you just put that in there. Sometimes it comes from people constantly asking questions like, there's a priest background in this book, and the priest background is there because since Fantasy Age has 3 classes, right? You've got your mages, your thieves or rogues, and your warriors. And basic D&D had 4 classes: thieves, wizards, fighters, and clerics. You frequently get the question when you are a Fantasy Age developer, hey, how do I play a cleric? And the answer is a cleric is just a mage, maybe with a priest background, that picks a different set of spells. So sometimes you are directly responding to feedback from players and GMs and the community. We would like to see this. How would this thing work? This would be really popular. If maybe you're doing a show every week so that people can tell you, you can gauge their response when you say, hey, right, the new book will give you the option of playing bunny centaurs, and people go crazy over the idea of anthropomorphic bunnies. And so you're like, well, we can make sure that we include that as an option.
Life imitating art for sure. Hey, real quick, I wanted to say this. Ren says, age games work best, in my opinion, if the GM considers every age line to be additional source books for their games. Books like this one are a goldmine for modding games.
Yeah. This is specifically designed to allow you to modify things. And that sort of gets me to the next thing I wanted to touch on as, in my opinion, a really important and short, often overlooked part of this book. And that's down on page 21 of the PDF, 20 if you're in the print version. It's the opening of the new talents and specializations line, which has, again, a piece of art I just love. One of the things I love about it is that the guy sticking to the ceiling seems to have a spider-like tattoo on his chest, suggesting that...
funny.
Yeah.
Where's this? Oh, here we go.
Right. But that section opens with, instead of just saying, here are new talents, new specializations, with talking about how you make and modify talents and specializations yourself as a GM. And there's only so much, a lot of, this isn't a point-based system. So we can't tell you, hey, if you follow these rules, what you have will be exactly correct and you won't possibly have any mistakes. But it is really easy for us to say, hey, if your campaign should have something in it, right? Like, let us say that you're going to have a spider cult, and the spider cult aren't necessarily villains, and you want spider cultists to have certain powers. Okay, let's create a spider cult specialization, but we want to give you some guidance on how that would be appropriate and what your various options are to do it. And that's one of the reasons why we talk about possibly modifying existing talents rather than always or specializations, or always making new ones. So
one of the things I wanted to add real quick to this conversation is the fact that, in our... It's something I just realized, but also it's just brilliant how much time we take to thoughtfully share how to do these things. It's not just a straight list of like, roll the die, do the thing, move forward, but it really seeks to sort of inform that creative process for the GM so that they can, and so that their players end up enjoying this even more. That's a real fascinating thought process. And, it's trying to guide a creative endeavor, from afar, or, whether it's across time or what have you. I'm even finding that it is touching on some universal truths on how to create stories that people enjoy and love, and that they're kind of timeless.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's just really fascinating. I love it.
So from there, we then get into actually going over some new talents, some of which are obviously being driven by specific, let's say, tropes or archetypes, right? We literally have Mighty Thews as a talent in this game, which is to allow you to be stronger and mightier, but without just boosting your strength score. And that is important because it gives a character the option. My character is clearly stronger than people that haven't taken this talent, without numerically making everything strength related irrelevant to you, or just saying, hey, you get to break the numbers and the character generation that we've set out. So you're paying a price, you're using a resource, what your talents are, to do it. It also has Inspire, which I think is really interesting because it is a potentially combat useful use of communication. So that's another great example of us trying to go in and say, if you've got a high communication character, that doesn't really matter in combat normally. And here's an example where it could.
Real quick, I want to just check before we jump on. I want to say Brian Irving shares that they run a game on the high seas where the PC are crew on a ship where they all are elves or beast folk. That's awesome. And we've got some late joiners, and better late than not at all. Jason and our friend Slit, and then Stan. Good to see you, my friend. Again, like I said, late is okay, just so long as you're here, and we're glad to see you.
Absolutely. So I then want to go to page 23 or 22 if you're in the physical book with the first of the new specializations, Arcane Dabbler. So Arcane Dabbler is a really super important example of how you can use specializations to totally change the feel of a fantasy age game that has implications for your entire society.
Sorry, let me get there real fast. I just want to be able to see it. Am I? What page was that on again?
It's page 23 of the PDF.
Okay.
It is the first of the new specializations. Go, up from there. You're in Bard. And there's Arcane Dabbler.
There we go. Thank you.
So in the base rules, if you are a mage, you get spells. And if you're a rogue or a warrior, you don't. Full stop. You do not have any method for picking up spells. So Arcane Dabbler is specifically a specialization that allows you as a warrior or a rogue to pick up a little bit of magic. You will never have the amount of magic that a mage does. But one of the things that is a trope in a lot of fantasy stories are the sort of multi-class characters, if you will, the people that have a little bit of one thing in addition to a lot of the other. If you've read the Fafhrd and Grey Mouser stories by Fritz Lieber, the Mouser is a classic rogue who has picked up a little magic along the way. And Fafhrd is a warrior, but he was also a priest for a long period of time. So those are both character concepts which have a long tradition, that predate role-playing games, of saying, yes, this character is primarily a rogue or primarily a warrior, but they dabble a little bit in magic. There's no way to make that character in the base rules. And so here we're showing you a specialization that this one little specialization that just follows the normal specialization rules. And it's got some noteworthy requirements. You've got to take arcane lore as a focus. You've got to have an intelligence and willpower of 2 or more, which means that you have fewer combat relevant stats, most likely as a rogue or a warrior. But that is an opportunity to pick up just a little bit of magic. And that means that as soon as that is in a campaign, that campaign is saying that magic is not restricted just to people who specialize in it. That magic can be picked up by, if not anyone, a broader range of people. And a lot of the specializations in here are looking at some pretty classic tropes. On the next page, we've got the Bard of the Beast Master, for example, which are obviously inspired by Bard characters in role-playing games and fantasy stories. And, there's literally a movie called Beastmaster, which clearly is part of the inspiration of doing a Beastmaster specialization.
Little known, that movie was meant to be a musical, so I can see why you would blend a Bard and a Beastmaster.
Yeah, so actually little known that book or that movie is officially based on a Andre Norton novel, which is a science fiction novel that has someone with some telepathy, but is not at all a barbarian fantasy novel, and was so wildly different from the novel that Andre Norton had her name taken off of it. But it was officially an adaptation of her story.
I like it.
So, the champion is clearly looking at the paladin type, the commander, a marshal. The Delver is looking at, hey, I want to be a dungeon specific thing. Several of these are obviously inspired by specific fantasy characters and tropes. If you go to page 27, page 26 in the physical book, you will see that there is a sidebar that opens with "I do not kill with my gun," which is an obvious nod to the gunslinger. Someone noted Beastmaster does star Mark Singer. It's true, Stan. It does.
See, we're really tying together the loops here. We're figuring it out.
But I do not kill with my gun is part of the litany of Roland, the character from the Dark Tower novels, which is a fantasy Old West sci-fi reality hopping series by Stephen King. So when speaking about your question earlier about where inspirations come from, sometimes there are little nods like putting in part of that litany at the top of that sidebar that tell you exactly where someone is coming from when they're looking at that.
Challenge for the chat real fast. Finish the sentence. I do not kill with my gun. I kill with my fill in the blank. I'm just curious.
Yeah. Okay.
What do you kill with? What do you kill with, Owen?
Oh, I kill with words.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Usually written ones. My pen is mightier than a sword.
Truth.
And my laptop puts my pen to shame.
Yeah, you've got all the weapons, and really, you got all the weapons, and then your wit and charm is a perfect delivery for the actual kill, which I dig. So we hear.
I've got specialization in typed damage, right? If you write me up as an adventurer, I'm going to be running around with a keyboard, smashing things. It maybe little hammers instead of little keys. As I type, the hammers pop out of the end and smash people. So
I love that. Yeah, that is really great. You can just be, hold on here. I'm writing a stern letter to you. Immediately, you will be taken care of. Slit says hammer. Derek says smile. I like that. And Stan, we both share the same. We share the same murderous intention with our witty repartee. I love it. Good stuff. I am also curious, Ren. What is yours? I'm very, very Owen's Fight Club campaign. I love it. And onward we go. So what is next?
So there's a really great magic section, and it's pretty self-explanatory. It's a lot of new arcana, and I don't want to. I could do a whole show just going through. Hey, it's the psychic arcana. But it ends with minor arcana, which are kind of the concept of cantrips, and then minor magic talents, etc. Talks about divine magics, divine stunts around page 54, 55. So if you want to have divine and arcane magic be different, which is a trope that dates back to D&D and is therefore a lot of people consider the standard, even though it's much less common in fantasy fiction than it is in fantasy role-playing games. But if you want to do that, we've got rules for it in here on page 56.
I love divine stunts. That's a great addition.
Absolutely. And you can totally just say, hey, say if you are arcane or divine, and if you're arcane, you use magic stunts, and if you're divine, you use divine stunts, and everything else is the same, and that will totally give you still a different feel. There's the next chapter, starting on page 57, 56, if you're in the physical book, is advanced rewards, which I love the piece of art there on that page at the beginning of that chapter, because it gives you a real feel for what we mean by advanced rewards, right? That's someone who's obviously getting knighted. That is more than a sack of gold or experience points. That is a position that can change the game. And we do a lot in this section about noble titles and memberships of groups and being an authority figure. And then we sort of switch gears entirely and talk about artifacts as a way to have a reward that is more than regular magic items and different things you can do with artifacts. And then some sample artifacts. I think that's all really great stuff. I just don't think it's something that we need to go over in any great detail here, because I think people that want it are going to understand how to get to it.
I do want to unpack memberships.
Yeah.
That's great.
You can be, as a reward, you can be granted membership into a group, right? And the first sentence, as the saying goes, membership has its privileges. So it is not at all unusual for a story to have guilds or organizations or secret societies that it is beneficial to be part of. So if we're talking about, hey, there are knighthoods of the realm, or there's an assassin's guild, or possibly there is something that sounds pretty unimportant and uninteresting, right? Maybe you all are part of the Cobblers Guild, and everyone's like, well, who cares about the Cobblers Guild? They make shoes. But it turns out that the Cobblers Guild are the people who have the number one interface with the Fae folk, because fairies came and helped a cobbler once. And so the Cobblers Guild is actually this incredibly powerful, supernatural negotiating group that are the people that go out and cut deals with fawns and have to help out unicorns, and all of that has become part of being a cobbler. And then you get to build these things around your game, right? So if the Cobblers Guild is this incredibly important and influential group, then you can say, hey, there are only two ways to become a cobbler, a member of the Cobblers Guild. One is that you're born into a cobbler family and they bring you in, sort of like, Freemasonry type thing. Or secondly, if you do a big favor for a cobbler, they might sponsor you and get you in. And so you can have that sort of thing where, you found someone who had a thorn through his boot who was in trouble, and they need your help, and you assist them instead of ignoring them, and you're kind to them, and you help get them home, and you treat them well. And then as a reward, sure, you get the treasure and you get the experience, but then he might say, hey, I'm willing to sponsor you to the Cobbler Guild. And if the players haven't already picked up that the Cobblers Guild is this incredibly important thing, he can say, hey, I'd like to sponsor you to the Cobblers Guild. We'll be doing that at the local menhirs, surrounded by the fairy stones and the mushroom rings, and I'll introduce you to the queen of summer. And they're like, wait, you're the cobbler? What does this have to do? And then right. So I love making organizations as part of my world building for fantasy games. I do.
And what a fun thing for the participants to sort of add a little texture to their character, to their playing. I love that Ren says that Divine Stan has changed how my campaign works. Divine Stan has changed. Oh, I think stunts, right? You mean stunts, but there is a Divine Stan effect here at ThursdAGE, really at all times. So you can imagine my confusion. So Slit says, yes, make my shoes and I'll protect your garden from insects and rodents alike, cobbler. I love it. All right, on we go.
So the next section has the mass battles, which I already talked about, I think, in plenty of discussion. But if you go to page 73 of the PDF, or page 72 if you're in the physical book, you get into realms and organizations. And that talks about how to have some game mechanical notes on groups, right? Be those a kingdom or an order of knighthood or whatever, and they can have special assets and services and treasuries and garrisons. If you want organizations to become an important part, one way of doing that is obviously to do the memberships. This is sort of the other side of it, where you're like, can the organizations themselves be engaged in activities that you have to look at? And so we've got an example organization of the Order of the Silver Chalice, and we talk about growth of organizations, and there's a chart on page 76, organization misfortune, where it talks about things that might happen to the organization. So there's a bunch of stuff that can be part of a organization, which you could also use, for example, if the players wanted to start an organization.
I love it.
It then gets into plots, and we've got things like plot stunts. Let's see, starting on page 77, long involved plots, other actions, how plots derive to organizations so that you've got things like, make another plot action immediately against an organization, the important members defect, or there's an extreme devastation, etc. All of that is a great way to organize organizations and use them as part of a game. And then there are several pages of examples. So you can, we got a local temple or a minor noble house or a demonic cult, which just gives you some idea of how they would look with, tracking their might, wealth, influence, intrigue, their weirdness, their structure, stability, scope. Again, those are rules that you don't have to play with, but if you specifically were, for example, doing, hey, we're going to have a court intrigue group, this is a great way to say, okay, you're part of a minor house at the moment, and maybe you want to grow it, and maybe you're trying to deal with the might of a merchant guild, etc. So there's a game mechanical piece to that.
A quick question for you. I'm just curious about the difference between this sort of organizational approach, like how to manage organizations in your campaign. How does that differ from, say, Chronicle?
So Chronicle has it. That's the Chronicle system for people who are only
Age acolytes.
Yeah, thank you. The Chronicle system takes a very different approach where sort of what organization, what group you are part of and tied to is a crucial and driving port of the whole game. So that isn't a secondary potential option. It is very much a built-in part of the game. And Chronicle is great for games where you want that to be a crucial driving part of what's going on with the game, whereas it can be an important driver, but it's sort of always going to be secondary to personal scale action in a nearly any age system.
I like that. Yeah, sometimes you're in the mood for that deep sort of intrigue, and sometimes a little light touch is nice as well.
So, as I was saying, let's see. There we go. After all the organizational stuff and the example organizations, Troy, if you would go to page 82.
I would.
Which is the beginning of vehicles, chases, and structures. I think the illustration here is relatively important for understanding how we feel about adding odd things to age. Very specifically, you see that we've got some people being chased by a T-Rex while in what is very clearly a car.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want to add steampunky sci-fi weird time-traveling cars to your Fantasy Age game, not only do we have rules for vehicles in this, but we are giving you visual okay that you can do that. We're trying not to create... So this book in particular, we want to show you what your options are rather than insist that you do things one particular way. So all the illustrations in this book, in this chapter, in my opinion, are particularly flavorful and interesting and show potentially a very different take on things. Another example is down on page 89. I don't know that it's obvious right off the top of the glance, but once again, and I presume, that thing that looks like a giant in the background, that's a building on its back.
Oh, I see that. Yeah.
That's a vehicle. His helmet is a retaining wall. So again, if this is not every campaign is it going to be appropriate to have a weird giant with a tree for an attack that has an actual building that is carrying around. But if you want to do that, here we have the rules for structures and vehicles that you can do it with, and there's more than one way you can do it. Okay, go to page 92, because I know we're running out of time.
Oh my gosh, we really are. We really are. And then we'll jump into, we're talking about supporting cast?
Yeah. Here we're talking about how to make people that aren't the player characters or the things they kill important. And this uses relationships, which are borrowed from Blue Rose, and they talk about bond and intensity and changing bonds and what happens when relationships are threatened or they grow, how you connect them to NPCs, etc. If you want people's relationships to each other to be an important driving force of the game, this whole chapter is for you. It also gets into followers and animal companions, lists some potential followers like a bodyguard, a sellsword, squire, valet, etc. All of that is great for when that is the tone you want for your game. And this chapter even opens with, relationships aren't appropriate for every Fantasy Age campaign. This is just another option if you want that to be part of the driving force. And then after that, we get into NPCs and mortal adversaries, which is more about making people interesting, talking about what is important by them, what their motivations are, what their quirks are, what their advantages are. And that's just for someone who has an idea for, I specifically want, we tell you in the basic rule book, you can just make villains and be roughly near these numbers and you're good. But this is about, hey, I specifically want this person to be the Dark Knight, and I want him to feel like a warrior, and I want him to be the nemesis of one of the players, etc.
I'm checking out the relationship stunts, and I love it. As you wish and prepare to die. That's very funny. A little nod to a movie that. Yeah. I love it. Right. I love it. So we got some questions. How do you want to do this? Yeah. So one of the questions. So Jason says sumo wrestling should be an Olympic sport. Okay. We will take that up on our Olympic sport live stream that we do on Sundays at 5 in the morning.
Big fan of sumo, and I think Jason knows that. And in fact, sumo is being an exhibition sport this year in Tokyo.
Aha. Well, there you go. So there you have it. We are pro sumo here at ThursdAGE, and glad you brought it up. How powerful is magic in this game? Asks Slit.
So that is a really interesting question. Magic is more reliable and less peak powerful in Fantasy Age than in a lot of role-playing games. A mage, for example, has an arcane blast that they can just use to blast things. You do have a skill check for more powerful spells, and when you are building a spellcaster, you want to look at what the skill check for various spells is. Because, for example, there are some lightning spells that are difficult to cast because they're particularly powerful, and they're sort of designed for more powerful characters, even though there's nothing to tell you that other than the test number is higher for those particular spells. But you don't have things like Wish. So the idea is that you are in total impact on the environment around you. A 5th level mage should have the same total impact as a 5th level rogue or a 5th level warrior. They just do a great deal more of it through magic. And that does mean that you are frequently running the risk, okay, I'm going to try and cast this spell. You might fail because that spell has a much greater impact on the game than a single attack by a warrior or one attempt to sneak past someone by a rogue. So it doesn't have the heights of having wish spells and teleportation is rare, et cetera, but they are very much characters that at first level you can be side by side with the other players doing useful things consistently. And you shouldn't ever have the case where you're like, well, I can't go adventuring anymore today, because you always have that arcane blast available.
So we are up against time, but I do want to say a couple things. I'm thinking about wish magic, and it's one of those things where like you think you're going to cast just a really big, beautiful spell, but you just get a really tiny, weird one instead.
Yeah.
Just like when you order stuff from Wish. Let's see. Chris says, darn, missed the start of the show. Hey, I'm glad you're here. That's our buddy from the UK. And Derek says, working on developing a socio-political revolution in my setting. Any advice? Wow. Save the big questions for last, my friend.
So while we are having me answer that, Troy, we once again have some beautiful art from our friend Stan over on Facebook that you should grab while I talk about a socio-political revolution.
The timing is perfect.
If you are looking at developing a socio-political revolution in your setting, you definitely want the Fantasy Age Companion. Because what you need to do is define what relationships and organizations are driving your revolution. So if we're going to do a random example, let us say that you have a kingdom that is entirely ruled by wizards. Wizards are considered the nobility, the ability to use magic. Mages are considered to have been anointed by the power of nature itself. But they have made a lot of weird decisions over their lives, including creating a species of amorphous shapeshifters that can take the form of any small inanimate object, and that these shapeshifters are advocating for the destruction of the mageocracy on the idea that they are treated by the mages as second-class citizens. And while maybe there are some mages that argue against that, the society as a whole is discussing using them as tools rather than as people. At that point, you're already saying, okay, I need some organizations to represent the mageocracy. If there are mages that are speaking out against it, they probably have some organization which they put in there, have some key figures to build relationships with that allows you to have, if one player has a key relationship with the Mage King and is like, yeah, the Mage King, okay, he's a little traditionalist, but he's a good guy, that will drive some of the tension when other people are like, look, the Mage King has to step down or he has to be killed because ultimately this system needs to be brought down. And then you can look at the various groups. Maybe there's an actual, mimics march that is where the little inanimate objects are getting together and arguing for them being able to be free and independent. So you take those tools and you put them together, and then you see where the players go with it. What do they interact with? What are they interested in? And if the answer is none of it, you can always have it going in the background, right? If you have those tools like organizations and relationships available to the players that are clearly tied to this socio-political revolution and no player takes advantage of them, that kind of tells you that they are not playing characters that they want to get involved in those things. So either don't force them to, in which case you just have those things going in the background and they deal with the consequences and the fallout, or sit down and have a conversation with them and saying, hey, I was really wanting to do this kind of game and you all aren't interacting with it.
And so then as far as the resource, then would the Fantasy Age Companion be a great source?
Yeah, totally.
To mine that. Yeah, that's great. Well, that's fantastic. It's 3:03. We got to go, my friend. But before we do, I'm going to pull some art, and that's so good. This is, of course, how Owen kills people with his keyboard, and you do. Yeah, there is a killing happening here.
I love that the keyboard apparently has a neck strap.
Right. What I love the most about this, you are not amused. Like you are literally used.
No, I'm very much in the zone there.
You Absolutely. Are really killing. You're killing it. As you do every Thursday when we hang out and talk to these wonderful people. And I want to thank everybody for watching. I want to thank everybody for your continued support. And we just have a blast when we do this, Owen. I'm a huge fan. It's sitting down and being able to kind of unpack these tools and assets for GMs and players alike. It's just a real joy for me. And I am, of course, the disembodied voice of Troy. Next Monday, we have the Mutants and Masterminds Monday, and we got something kind of fun to talk about. I want to encourage you to join us at 2 p.m. Pacific here in these same places, and then Owen, you and I come back Thursday. My question for you real quick is, did we do the companion justice? Is there more to talk? Did we get through it?
The only thing left is the chapter of variant rules, and I think it's pretty self-explanatory, right? So
right.
If your game should be more deadly or less deadly, more cinematic, harder to die, whatever, look through the rules in there. And I think there isn't enough there that I want to do another whole show on it, unless people find they've got questions along the lines of, hey, how do I do a socio-political revolution in my campaign? In which case, sure, if you want to know how a series of options can or can't be melded, combined, twisted, aligned, and combined to make a specific feel of a game, then by all means send the question to letsplay@greenronin.com and we'll spend some more time on it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Otherwise, we will move on to another book.
Yeah, absolutely. And do we want to share that news, or I don't have it up right away, so I don't have it on the tip of my tongue. We'll let you know in our event announcements. Join us. We'll have a good time. And as Owen said, let's play at greenronin.com is a great way to get your question in before everybody else's, and you may change the whole course of the future just by sending a little note. So please do so. For that, have a fantastic rest of your week, and we will talk to you soon. Bye, everyone.
Bye, folks.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.